Why was she the only one who didn't speak in the room? The briefing had started 20 minutes ago. Maps scattered across the table, commanders leaning over with hands pressed flat, their voices sharp with clipped words. Coordinates, deadlines, routes. Every man at that table had said something, except her. She sat at the far end, silent, back straight, eyes fixed on the red line drawn across the terrain map. The line meant death, or salvation, depending on who carried it through. But no one asked her what she thought. No one even looked her way. Maybe they had forgotten her, or maybe they didn't want to remember what she had become. Her hand twitched against her thigh, an old reflex. She could still feel the cold steel of a rifle stock there, years of training etched into her body like scars. She breathed quietly, deeply, her lungs steady, like iron forged under pressure. They thought silence meant she had nothing to say, but silence was her weapon. Silence was the only thing keeping her past from spilling into this room. Target compound, North Sector. Satellite confirms movement 2 hours ago, one of the officers barked. His voice echoed off the steel walls of the bunker, bouncing back like ricochets. She heard the words, she marked them, but her mind was already filling in the details, the weight of the air at night, the crunch of gravel under boots, the shape of shadows on uneven ground. They didn't see it. They couldn't. Maps and satellite feeds didn't bleed. But she had been there in places just like it, where silence decided who lived and who never came home. Her jaw clenched. She had promised herself she wouldn't return. Not after last time. Not after the night that had carved out everything soft in her and left her standing on bones. But here she was. A younger officer glanced her way just once. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He didn't know her. He'd only heard the rumors, that she had walked out of fire when no one else had, that her pulse had slowed in combat like some kind of machine, that she didn't speak because she didn't need to. The commander's voice cut through again. One carrier, 2 trucks, 12 men minimum inside. Intel suggests a high value, but the place is rigged. Mines, perimeter alarms, they expect us. We need someone who does miss. The room fell silent for a beat. Everyone knew what those words meant. Her throat tightened. She stared harder at the red line on the map. 12 men, maybe more, rigged ground. It wasn't an impossible mission, but it was one designed to swallow you whole. And that's when she felt it, the weight of every eye turning slowly toward her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew what they were asking. She had known the moment she walked into the room and saw the red line. Her silence cracked, not with words but with a breath. Slow, controlled, the kind you take before stepping onto a wire stretched over a canyon. The commander's voice softened, almost respectful now. You don't have to, no one would blame you. But he was wrong, they all would, and she would too. Because she wasn't here for them. She was here for the ghost she still carried, the one she never spoke of, the one that burned behind her ribs at night when the world was too quiet. She finally lifted her eyes, met the commander's stare. She said nothing, just nodded once. And that was enough. The room shifted, orders resumed, radios buzzed, boots scraped. But she stayed still, the weight settling over her like an old coat she had tried to burn years ago. Someone leaned close, whispering as if to test if she was real. Why do you do this, after everything? Her eyes flickered to him, unreadable. She wanted to say, because I don't know who I am without it, but she didn't. She only answered with silence, the kind that carried more weight than words. Hours later, the night air hit her lungs. Cold, sharp. The kind of air that reminded her she was alive even when she wished she was. She adjusted the strap of her pack, the leather worn smooth from years of missions. Her boots sank into mud as she followed the small unit toward the carrier. Engines hummed low, headlights dimmed. The world outside the base was vast, shadowed, unforgiving. Mountains like jagged teeth cut into the horizon, their peaks veiled in cloud. The smell of diesel clung to the air, mixing with damp earth. She sat near the back, rifle laid across her lap. Her fingers brushed the metal like it was an old friend. And maybe it was. It had been with her longer than most people. The men around her filled the silence with nervous talk. About home. About things waiting for them if they made it back. One soldier, barely more than a boy, whispered about a daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years. His voice trembled with both pride and fear. Another confessed he'd written letters he never sent, hidden in the bottom of his pack. She listened. She never joined in. Words like that weren't meant for her anymore. She was too far gone from them. But she remembered the weight of what they carried, the ache of something you couldn't afford to lose. And it cut her deeper than she let them see. The carrier jolted, mud spitting up against the steel sides. She steadied her rifle. Her eyes drifted shut for just a second, and behind the darkness memories clawed their way back. A burning field, smoke thick as tar, the sound of screaming she couldn't silence, and one face clear in the chaos, a face she couldn't save. Her hand tightened on the rifle until her knuckles whitened. She opened her eyes again. No one noticed. They thought she was made of steel, but steel rusts in silence. The radio cracked, coordinates confirmed, they were close. The boy with the daughter glanced at her, his lips pressed tight. Do you ever get used to it, the waiting? Her voice, when it came, startled even her. Low, steady, like a drumbeat under fire. No. That was all she said. But his shoulders dropped, as if the truth, bare and simple, gave him permission to feel afraid. The carrier slowed. Engines cut. The night swallowed them whole. Crickets filled the silence, their rhythm broken only by the click of weapons being checked, safeties flicked. The smell of damp grass rose sharp, mixed with oil and sweat. She stepped down last, boots sinking into wet earth. She scanned the horizon. No lights, no sound, just the vastness of dark waiting. Her heart didn't race. It never did. Instead, it slowed, every beat deliberate, measured. Her body shifted into that state she had both hated and relied on, the state where nothing else existed but survival. The commander signaled. Hands moved like shadows. The team began their silent march across the field. She followed, eyes forward, breath even, every step a choice, every step a reminder. And though no one said it, they all knew, she wasn't just walking toward a target. She was walking toward something else entirely, something buried in her chest, something that had never let her go. The night pressed tighter around them. The air smelled of rain, heavy with the promise of a storm. Her veins carried fire. Her lungs carried steel. And somewhere deep inside, past the silence and scars, she carried one truth she had never spoken aloud. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of failing again. And that fear was what made her unstoppable. What did it mean when the night was too quiet? She had learned to fear silence more than noise. Noise gave you something to hold on to, footsteps, a whisper, the click of metal against metal. But silence was a void. It hid the things waiting to break you. The unit moved low through the grass, every figure a shadow. The moon was a sliver, barely enough to paint their outlines. Somewhere ahead, beyond the tree line, was the compound. The red line from the map had turned into real dirt under their boots, real risk breathing down their necks. She brought up the rear, eyes scanning, rifle cradled but ready. Her breath fogged faintly in the chill. She counted steps in her head, a rhythm to steady herself, a way to drown out the memory clawing at the edges of her mind. They reached the first ridge. The team dropped low, crouching behind rock. One man pulled out the scope, glass glinting faintly before he shielded it with his hand. "Movement North Tower," he whispered. She didn't need the scope. Her eyes had learned the language of shadow years ago. She saw the faint shift, the outline of a guard turning his head, cigarette glowing faint red between his fingers. Too relaxed, not expecting anyone yet. Her fingers flexed against the rifle stock. She could take him from here. One breath, one squeeze, but the order hadn't come. The commander's hand signaled, "Wait." So she waited, muscles taut, eyes locked. The silence pressed in again. The boy with the daughter crouched near her. His breath was quick, unsteady. She could hear it more than see it. He whispered, almost too low, "You ever think about what happens if we don't come back?" The question hung heavy. In the dark, with death less than 100 yards away, it wasn't a soldier asking. It was a man. She wanted to answer, to tell him that yes, she thought about it every single time, but she couldn't let him carry her truth. Her truth was poison. It killed softer things. Instead, she shifted her gaze from him to the guard in the tower. Her silence was answer enough. The commander moved again. 2 men to the left, circling. She and the boy held position. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet earth and smoke from the guard's cigarette. Then the sound, a distant hum, low, mechanical. She froze, not a truck, too faint, too high-pitched. Her stomach clenched, a drone. She looked up. The sky was starless, clouds heavy, nothing visible, but she knew. She felt it. The way the air trembled when eyes you couldn't see locked onto you. Her hand gripped the boy's shoulder, hard, his breath hitched. She whispered, voice barely a thread, "Down." They flattened just as the faint red beam scanned over the ridge. Too close, too slow. It lingered, sweeping across rock, grass, soil. Her chest pressed into earth, heartbeat steady only because she forced it to be. The boy trembled beside her, his fingernails digging into the mud. The drone passed, the hum faded. But the silence it left was worse. The commander's eyes cut to her in the dark. He knew she had saved them from being seen. His nod was sharp, but he didn't speak. No one spoke. Words would only betray how close death had brushed against their skin. Minutes crawled. The guard in the tower flicked his cigarette away, sparks dying in the grass. He stretched, turned, bored. Still no idea how near the hunters were. Finally, the signal came. She raised her rifle, breath slow, every motion practiced to the marrow. She aligned the crosshairs, found the soft hollow of his temple in the dark. The boy whispered, "Do it." Her breath stilled, she squeezed. The shot was a whisper, muffled by the suppressor. The guard crumpled, body folding into shadow. His cigarette burned faintly in the dirt, the only trace he'd ever been there. Her lungs exhaled slowly. The boy stared, his whisper broke. How do you do it like it's nothing?" Her eyes stayed on the scope. "It's never nothing." He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he didn't want to. The team moved again, inching closer. The compound loomed now, dark walls broken by slivers of light from within. Every window a threat. Every silence a scream waiting to be heard. Her chest tightened. She had walked into places like this before. Some she had walked out of. Some had swallowed people she loved whole. Her boots crunched faintly on gravel. The sound echoed too loud in her head. She blinked, and for a heartbeat she wasn't here. She was back there. Another mission, another compound, fire tearing through the walls, her ears ringing until she couldn't tell if the screams were theirs or hers. She forced it down. Now wasn't then, now was survival. The commander held up a fist. The team froze. A sound, subtle, not wind, not crickets, footsteps. She melted lower into shadow, scope raised. Through the scope she caught him, a guard packing along the outer wall. Casual, rifle slung carelessly over one shoulder. She almost envied him. His world wasn't full of ghosts. His next breath wasn't borrowed. She lined him up, her finger curled, but then something made her pause. He stopped to light another cigarette. For a second the flame illuminated his face. Young, too young. Her chest tightened, a flicker, a memory. Someone else's young face in firelight, someone she hadn't saved. Her hand shook just once, barely, enough for her to hate herself for it. She shifted her aim. Lower, quieter, one breath, one squeeze. The guard dropped, the cigarette burning bright for half a second before it rolled into the dirt. Her eyes closed briefly, her silence heavier now. The boy beside her whispered again, "You didn't aim for his head." She didn't answer. He wouldn't understand. Some deaths you carried forever. The only choice left was how much weight you wanted to add to the pile. The team pushed closer, slipping through the first breach in the wall. Inside the compound, the silence grew suffocating. The smell of oil, of sweat, of metal long rusted. Somewhere deeper, faint voices carried. Men speaking low, unaware of the storm pressing against their gates. Her chest rose steady. Her lungs carried steel, but her heart whispered louder than she wanted. What if she failed again? The thought cut her sharper than the risk of bullets ever could. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. She wasn't here just for the mission. She was here because this place, this compound, this target, was connected to the face she could never forget, the ghost she carried, the night that had broken her. And if she failed again, she wouldn't survive herself. Why did the compound feel alive? The walls weren't just stone and rusted metal. They breathed. She could feel it. The faint vibration through her boots, the tremor in the air that didn't belong to wind or insects. It was the kind of hum that told you something waited inside, something prepared, something patient. The unit slipped through the breach, one by one, their shadows folding into the deeper dark of the compound. She entered last, rifle close, every muscle taut. The air smelled of oil, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, old but not forgotten. Her chest tightened. The memory threatened again, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to see that night here. Not yet. The commander raised a fist. Halt. They froze, crouched low against the inner wall. Voices drifted from somewhere ahead, muffled by distance. Laughter. Careless. The kind of sound men made when they thought they were untouchable. Her jaw clenched. Laughter like that had haunted her before, until it had turned to screams. The boy crouched near her, his eyes darting, his hand trembling slightly against his rifle. She could see the sweat glistening on his temple even in the dark. He was too young, too untested, and yet here he was, carrying more weight than he should. He whispered, barely audible, "What if they hear us?" Her eyes flicked to him. She wanted to tell him the truth, they will. But truth could shatter men before bullets ever reached them. Instead, she leaned close, her voice calm, steady, quiet as the night. "Then we don't give them time to react." He nodded, swallowing hard, clutching the rifle tighter. The commander's signal came, "Move." They slipped deeper, hugging the wall, steps silent on the dirt ground. The laughter grew clearer, closer. A light flickered in the distance, a lantern swinging, casting uneven shadows across crates and barrels stacked haphazardly. She lifted her scope. 4 men, relaxed, one leaning back against a crate, cigarette smoke curling around his head, another sitting cross-legged on the ground, AK resting across his lap. Too easy, too exposed, a trap. Her gut clenched. She had seen this before, guards left careless on purpose. Bait. She lowered the scope, eyes narrowing. The hum in the air vibrated sharper now, threading into her bones. Mines, she thought. Sensors. Something waiting to light the sky red. She touched the commander's arm, shook her head once. His brow furrowed. She pointed to the dirt near the crates, then spread her fingers out like roots. Mines. His eyes widened slightly. He signaled, "Hold." But it was too late. The boy shifted his foot, barely an inch, and she heard it, the faintest click under pressure. Her blood froze. Her hand shot out, clamping hard on his arm. His eyes widened in shock. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. His breath hitched as he realized. A mine right beneath his boot. The world shrank to silence. Her heart didn't race, it slowed, steady, heavy, each beat a drum against her ribs. She leaned closer, whispering so soft it barely existed, "Don't move." His throat worked. His eyes brimmed with the terror of someone who had just glimpsed the edge of death. The commander caught on, his face tightening, his hands signaling the rest of the unit to freeze. She crouched slow, deliberate, lowering herself to the boy's boot. Her fingers brushed the damp earth, tracing the faint ridge around the metal buried below. Old, Russian design, pressure triggered. Her lungs filled with steel, her veins with fire. She had disarmed these before, but never with someone's shaking leg pressed on top of one. She whispered again, "Breathe slow." His voice broke, "I can't." She met his eyes, hard, steady, the kind of stare that forced calm into another person whether they wanted it or not. "Yes, you can, with me, now." She inhaled deep and slow. He tried to match it, his chest jerking. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes. She hated herself for what she saw there. Not weakness, not fear, but youth. A boy who should have been home, holding his daughter, not standing here with death under his boot. Her fingers worked the dirt, feeling the edges of the mine. Sweat dripped down her temple, cold against her cheek. The silence pressed like a weight. Even the laughter of the guards felt far away now. Finally she found the catch. Rusted stiff. She could slide a blade under, maybe. But one wrong angle, one slip, and the boy would be gone in a flash of fire and bone. Her knife slid free, edge catching faint moonlight. She worked it in slow, breathing with him. Every fraction of movement measured, counted. Her muscles screamed with stillness. Seconds stretched into years. The boy's tears traced silent lines down his face. She wanted to tell him he would see his daughter again, but promises were lies in places like this. The blade caught, shifted. The pressure quivered under his boot. Her heart clenched, then released. The catch gave, the mine loosened. She pulled the blade free, slid her fingers under the edge, and lifted. Click. Her blood iced, but nothing happened. The mine was in her hand now, trembling faintly, weight heavy and alive. She pulled it away from his boot, slow, until he could step back. His knees buckled as he moved, his breath breaking into a sob he tried to swallow. Her hand closed around the mine, pressing it to her chest, holding it steady. The boy stared at her like she had just dragged him out of his grave. His whisper was hoarse, broken. "Why would you risk that for me?" Her silence lingered. Her eyes softened for the first time that night. She wanted to tell him because someone once risked everything for me and I couldn't save them. But the words stayed locked. Instead, she placed the mine gently into the dirt, setting it down like an offering to the earth. Then she turned, rifle back in hand, eyes cold again. The commander's gaze met hers, unreadable, a nod, respect unspoken. But inside her the memory roared back. The face, the fire, the hand that had once dragged her out of a death trap, only to fall moments later. Her silence cracked in her chest, but not in her voice. Her lungs carried steel, her veins carried fire, and still she carried the ghost of the one she could not save. The boy wiped his face, ashamed of the tears, but she didn't judge him. Tears meant he was still human. She wondered if she still was. The guards ahead laughed again, unaware. The unit moved forward, shadows pressed tight to the walls. Her fingers brushed the trigger, steady, ready. But in her chest, a question lingered, one that gnawed louder than the hum of the compound. What would she do when she found the man inside, the one connected to that night, the one who had tied her silence to this place? She didn't know, and the not knowing terrified her more than death itself. The base was quieter after dark, but quiet did not mean peace. On most nights, the desert air seemed to hum with an energy that had nothing to do with the crickets or the wind cutting across the hangars. It was the kind of stillness soldiers knew all too well, the stillness before orders dropped, before missions ignited, before lives were drawn into a storm they could not escape. For her, that silence pressed differently. She stood alone by the edge of the tarmac, boots steady on the cracked concrete, her eyes locked on the shadowed outline of the jet she had flown just hours earlier. The F-22 sat beneath floodlights like a beast at rest, metal glinting with subdued menace. Every angle of it reminded her of the cockpit's vibration, the pull of gravity, the deafening roar that was at once destruction and salvation. She had not wanted this. For 12 years she had carved out a fragile life away from the machine, away from the steel and the sky, away from the ghosts. But war had a cruel memory, and it had remembered her name. That evening the colonel found her there. His voice cut through the darkness, stern but not unkind. "You flew like someone who never left." She did not turn immediately. She kept her gaze on the jet, as if it were safer than looking into a man's eyes. "Flying doesn't forget you," she answered quietly, "even if you try to forget it." The colonel stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. "You should know," he said. "The higher command has already been informed. What you did up there today, word doesn't stay buried. There are people who want you back, whether you're ready or not." Her chest tightened. The war she had hidden from was no longer a distant storm. It was reaching for her again, claws extended. Morning came with orders. She was summoned to the briefing hall, a place she had avoided for over a decade. The room smelled the same: coffee that had sat too long on burners, recycled air that clung to uniforms, the faint tang of oil and machinery from the hangars nearby. Faces filled the rows, some curious, some skeptical, many still whispering her name as if she were a rumor that had stepped into flesh. The mission was projected in stark detail on the screen at the front. Satellite images, enemy coordinates, an escalating conflict at the edge of a contested border. Intelligence suggested the opposing force had developed aerial maneuvers none of their active pilots had yet managed to counter. Losses were mounting. Morale was fraying. Her name was called to the roster, not as an advisor, not as a ghost, as a pilot. She felt the room tighten around her. Eyes darted. Some glared with disbelief, others with something close to relief. There were young pilots in that room, fresh out of training, who had only heard whispers of her days in the sky. To them, she was legend and myth. To others, she was a deserter who had buried her wings when the world still burned. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Orders were not invitations, and the storm had already found her. The hours before deployment moved like a blur. Flight gear fitted against her body once more, heavy with memory. The helmet sealed over her head, muffling the world until only her breath echoed inside. She paused in the locker room, catching her reflection in the narrow strip of mirror. For a heartbeat, she didn't see herself. She saw the younger woman she had been, eyes alight with fire, hands trembling not from fear but from hunger. Hunger to prove herself, to touch the edge of the impossible. That woman had burned bright and fierce, but she had also buried friends, carried guilt, and fled the skis. Now another woman stared back, older, tempered, haunted, but still standing, still breathing, and about to climb into the sky again. The mission was brutal from the first minute. Enemy aircraft cut across radar like knives, darting in unpredictable arcs. Dogfights erupted high above the border, streaks of fire and metal ripping against the horizon. The F-22 bucked and roared beneath her, every movement testing the limits of her body and the memories she had buried. Her squadron followed, voices crackling through the comms. Target locked, missile incoming, break right. And then the silence she feared most, the dead line of a comrade cut off mid-word. Her chest ached, but her mind sharpened. She pushed the jet harder than she had in years, weaving between enemy trails, pulling maneuvers that textbooks no longer taught. She remembered what the others could not: the rhythms of chaos, the instinct to move where no one expected. The enemy circled, confident in their new formations. She broke them apart, one by one, dragging their arcs into spirals they could not control, forcing them into traps of their own design. Her squadron's disbelief filled her headset. "Did you see that?" She just flipped him into his own fire. "Who is she?" They did not yet know the full answer, but they knew enough: the tide was shifting. Hours later, the battle's roar gave way to silence again, not the silence of loss, but of exhausted survival. The squadron limped back toward base, fuel drained, nerves frayed. Her jet touched down first. The landing gear screamed, tires smoking against the tarmac. When the canopy opened, the world's noise crashed in all at once, the cheers, the disbelief, the footsteps rushing closer. She pulled off her helmet, breath ragged, hair damp against her forehead. The desert air struck her face, sharp and dry. Around her, pilots climbed out of their jets, some stumbling, some clutching bruises, but all alive, more alive than they had expected to be. And then it began, the whispers rising into words, the words into cheers. They would have killed us out there. She saved the whole squad. She's not just back, she's unstoppable. But she did not feel unstoppable. Not yet. Inside, her pulse thundered with the weight of memory, the faces of those who hadn't come back years ago, the vows she had made over graves, the reasons she had buried herself in silence for 12 long years. She walked past the crowd, past the outstretched hands, straight into the shadows of the hangar, away from the noise. Because she knew this was only the beginning. That night she sat alone again, but not at the edge of the tarmac. She sat in the dim light of her quarters, a letter in her hands. It was old, creased from years of being folded and unfolded. The handwriting was fading, but the words still carved into her chest. It had been written by a friend, one of the last she had lost in the skis. A friend who had believed in her more fiercely than she had ever believed in herself. When the sky calls you, you'll answer. You can't run from what you are. You can hide, you can bury it, but the fire will find you again. And when it does, don't fight it. Use it, because the world will need you more than you know. Her hand trembled as she traced the letters. Outside, the base was alive with celebration, but inside she knew the truth. The fire had returned, and it would not let her go. The desert sunrise painted the base in pale gold, but inside the command building the air was heavy, tense, almost suffocating. Officers moved briskly through the halls, their voices low, their eyes sharper than usual. Something was shifting, and every soldier felt it. She walked those halls in silence, the click of her boots echoing off the concrete floors. Just yesterday, she had been an outsider dragged reluctantly into the cockpit. Now she was the name on everyone's lips, the ghost who had returned, the pilot who had bent the sky back to her will. The whispers grew louder as she passed. Some carried awe, others carried bitterness. And beneath them all ran the same question: what happens now? The briefing room was darker than usual, shades drawn tight, a projector casting light against a screen filled with maps and threat markers. A dozen high-ranking officers sat at the long table, their faces carved with lines of war and age. At the head sat the general, broad-shouldered, voice like gravel dragged over steel. "You've stirred a storm," he said when she entered, no preamble, no softening. She stood at attention. "I only followed orders, sir." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though it didn't touch his eyes. "You followed instinct. That's the difference. And that's why they're talking about you in rooms far bigger than this one." He clicked a button on the projector. New images filled the screen, satellite captures of hangars hidden in enemy territory, new fighter silhouettes unlike anything they had faced before. Sleek, angular, a design that spoke of speed and malice. "These are prototypes," the general said. "We've had reports they'll be combat-ready within months, maybe weeks, and the truth is our current squadrons aren't ready for them. Yesterday proved that. We needed you and you delivered, but understand this, now they'll come harder." The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing into every man and woman present. Then his gaze fixed on her. "You've been out for 12 years. You wanted a quiet life, but quiet isn't an option anymore. You're back in the roster, not as a substitute, not as a guest, as one of ours." The words struck like both a sentence and a salvation. She had wanted to resist, to keep her distance, but the fire in her chest had already answered before her lips could. "Yes, sir." By afternoon, the base was alive with drills. New formations, harsher simulations, faster turnarounds. The young pilots stole glances at her in between maneuvers, whispers threading through the barracks and hangars. Some looked to her as a beacon. Others eyed her with jealousy, as though her presence was a challenge they had not chosen but now had to face. One of them, a young lieutenant named Carter, finally confronted her as she walked across the hangar floor. He was broad-shouldered, jaw-set, the kind of pilot who believed he was untouchable until reality broke the illusion. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. She didn't slow her pace, and yet here I am. You think you can just waltz back in after 12 years and take command of the sky? We've been bleeding out there while you've been hiding. His words were sharp, but his voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying something deeper than anger. She stopped then, turning to face him fully, her eyes locked with his, steady, unflinching. "I didn't hide," she said softly. "I survived, and now so will you if you stop letting your pride get in the way." For a moment his jaw worked, his fists clenched. Then he stepped back, swallowed hard, and said nothing more. That night she sat with her flight log open on the desk in her quarters. 12 years of silence lay between the last entry and today's. Her pen hovered over the page before she finally wrote, her handwriting firm, deliberate. "Mission complete. Enemy broken. Squadron returned. Fire returned." The words bled into the paper, simple yet heavy. She closed the log, her chest tight. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought memories, the old mission, the one that had broken her. She saw again the flash of fire, the spiraling descent, the soundless scream of a wingman lost to the void. She woke with her heart racing, her hands trembling, sweat slicking her skin. She sat in the dark for a long time, breathing slowly, steadying herself. The fire had returned, yes, but so had the ghosts. 3 days later the call came, not from her own command but from higher. The capital wanted her. She was flown to the city in a transport jet, its engines a dull hum against the vastness of the sky. From above, the capital spread like a jewel of glass and steel, but as they descended, she saw the barricades, the patrols, the tension simmering beneath the polished surface. The council chamber was vast, circular, filled with men and women in immaculate uniforms and tailored suits. The kind of people who made decisions that cost lives but never flew into the fire themselves. She stood in the center as they spoke about her like she was both weapon and liability. Her skill is undeniable. But her record, she walked away. "We need her. We can't trust her." Their voices rose, clashing like storms against stone. She stood still, hands at her sides, eyes forward. Finally, one voice cut through the noise, the chair of the council, a woman with silver hair and eyes sharp as glass. "Enough," she said. "We don't have the luxury of debating ghosts. She's alive, she's ready. And whether you like it or not, she's already proven herself. The question is not whether she flies. The question is, how far are we willing to let her lead?" The silence that followed was heavier than all the words before. Her gaze flicked upward then, meeting the council chair. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she was running from her past. She felt as though she were walking into it, head high, unshaken. When she returned to base, the colonel met her at the tarmac. "Well?" he asked, though his eyes already held the answer. "They'll use me," she said, "as far as they can." "And you?" She hesitated, the desert wind tugging at her hair, the hum of jets in the distance filling the silence. "Then I'll use myself," she said quietly, "as far as I must." The following week was relentless. She trained with the squadron until sweat soaked through flight suits, until muscles ached and nerves screamed. She pushed them, harder than they expected, harder than they wanted. But she also carried them, catching mistakes before they cost lives, teaching them tricks they hadn't known were possible. Some hated her for it, others began to trust her, all of them grew sharper. And still, when night fell, she was alone with the silence, alone with the ghosts. But now, when she stared at the reflection in the mirror, she no longer saw only the younger woman she had been, or the broken one she had become. She saw both, together. A soldier reborn, carrying fire and shadow alike. The storm had only begun to gather, and she was ready to step into it. The alarm shattered the silence before dawn. Klaxons wailed through the base, red lights flashing against the steel walls. She woke instantly, boots hitting the floor before thought had even caught up. Adrenaline filled her chest, her pulse steady but fierce. Something was wrong. This wasn't a drill. By the time she reached the hangar, pilots were already suiting up, mechanics shouting over the roar of engines spooling to life. The air smelled of fuel, sweat, and fear. Young faces pale under the harsh lights, hands trembling as they locked helmets into place. She moved among them with calm precision like a shadow cutting through chaos. Check your systems. Double-check your fuel. Don't look at the sky yet, look at your machines. Trust your machines and they'll trust you. They clung to her voice as though it were a lifeline. Some nodded sharply, others swallowed their fear in silence. And then the loudspeaker cut through the roar. Enemy strike group inbound. Estimated 2 minutes. Unknown number, unknown class. Her eyes flicked to the colonel. His face was grim, his jaw tight. He gave her the smallest nod, one that carried both trust and finality. She didn't hesitate. She climbed into her cockpit, the harness biting across her chest as she pulled it tight. The canopy closed, sealing her inside a world of humming electronics and cold steel. Her fingers moved across the controls with the muscle memory of a life she had thought she'd left behind. And then she heard them, the younger pilots, their voices trembling across the comms. Do we really have a chance against them? I heard these are the new ones, the prototypes. God, what if? She cut them off. Her voice was calm, quiet, firm. You don't need to be faster, you don't need to be stronger. You just need to remember this: fear makes you blind. Keep your eyes open and the sky will tell you where to go. Silence followed, not of despair but of focus. The runway stretched ahead, engines roared, and then launch. The sky was still streaked with the pale glow of morning as their formation climbed, breaking through the low clouds. The horizon burned gold, but further east, shadows moved, sleek black shapes cutting through the dawn. Her breath caught not from fear but recognition. The prototypes were real, faster, sharper. A new predator had entered the sky. The first clash was sudden, missiles streaking across the void, countermeasures flaring like dying stars. Her wingman swerved hard, heart-stoppingly close to a collision, his panicked breath filling the comms. She steadied him with 2 words: left, now. He obeyed. The missile streaked past, harmless. But the enemy was relentless. Their movements were precise, coordinated, almost mechanical. They pressed the formation hard, scattering the younger pilots. Cries filled the comms, fear, strain, the kind of panic that broke squadrons apart. Her mind moved faster than thought. She remembered the old patterns, the tricks that had once made her name whispered in training halls. She dove beneath one enemy fighter, engines screaming, the shockwave rattling her bones. Her missile locked, released, and the sky tore open with fire. Confirmed hit, the colonel's voice crackled through. Relief rippled across the comms. But victory was fleeting. For every one she struck, 2 more seemed to emerge from the horizon. Minutes stretched into eternities. Sweat trickled down her back beneath the harness. Her breath fogged the inside of her mask. Every movement was survival, instinct sharpened into steel. And then silence, not in the sky but in the comms. Carter, she called, no answer. Her heart clenched. She scanned the horizon until she saw it, a plume of smoke spiraling down, a parachute deployed. Relief and sorrow collided in her chest. He would live, but his machine was gone. The young pilots were breaking. She could hear it in their voices, see it in their scattered maneuvers. One by one, they were slipping toward panic. And then she did something unexpected, something no training manual would ever sanction. She laughed softly, calmly. The sound cut through the static, strange and steady. "Do you know what they used to call me?" she asked, her voice carrying across every channel. The silence that followed wasn't fear, It was curiosity. Even the colonel didn't interrupt. They called me the fortress, not because I never broke. I did. I broke more times than I can count, but I always rebuilt, stronger, colder, harder. And that's what you'll do today. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to refuse to stay broken. The words lingered in the comms, heavy and alive. And something shifted. The panic faded. The young pilots straightened in their seats, their voices firming as they confirmed positions, regrouped into formation. They weren't unafraid, but they were no longer ruled by fear. The battle dragged on. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, her mind felt carved down to raw instinct. She lost count of how many times she came within inches of death, but still she flew. Still she struck. At one point her canopy cracked, a spiderweb of fractures across the glass. Cold wind tore at her face, the roar deafening. She tasted blood on her lips but kept her eyes forward, hands steady. Every second was survival, every breath a battle. And then, at last, the tide shifted. The prototypes, fast as they were, had a flaw. Their engines overheated under sustained strain. She had noticed it, the way their trails burned hotter, the way their movements stiffened after long bursts. She exploited it, again and again, driving them into longer pursuits, forcing them into the very weakness their designers had overlooked. The sky turned from predator to prey. One by one the black shapes fell. Explosions lit the horizon. And then silence. Her cockpit was a cage of smoke and cracked glass. Her body trembled, exhaustion carving into her bones. Around her, the voices of the young pilots rose, not in panic this time, but in disbelief. Did we win? Are they gone? My God! The colonel's voice broke through, steady, low, almost reverent. You held the line, all of you, and you, fortress, reminded us how. When her boots touched the runway again, she nearly collapsed. Not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of it, the battle, the fear, the ghosts pressing against her lungs. The younger pilots swarmed her, faces lit with awe, gratitude, and something deeper, trust. Carter, his arm bandaged, stood apart at first, but then he stepped forward, met her eyes, and gave a single nod. Respect. She returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. That night she sat alone outside the hangar, the desert wind cold against her face. The stars stretched endlessly above, silent witnesses to everything she carried. She thought of the ones she had lost long ago, of the fire that had broken her, of the steel she had forced into her lungs just to breathe again. And for the first time in years, she felt not just the weight of survival, but the fragile, flickering warmth of purpose. The fortress was not unbroken. She was broken, rebuilt, scarred, but standing. And sometimes that was enough to hold the sky. Why did the victory feel so hollow? The sky had been cleared, the enemy driven back, the prototypes broken by her hand. The base had cheered when the squadron returned, voices echoing across the hangars, young pilots wide-eyed with relief. Yet when the noise faded, when the celebration dulled, she felt only silence pressing into her chest. She sat alone in the locker room that night, flight suit half unzipped, damp with sweat and blood. Her fingers traced the hairline crack across her helmet visor, a scar of survival. One good hit, 1 inch closer, and her story would have ended before it was ever told. The door creaked. Carter stepped inside, his arms still bound in a sling. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his shadow long in the dim light. Then slowly he crossed the room and sat opposite her. "You saved me up there," he said at last. His voice was low, unguarded, stripped of the pride that had once defined him. "I should have been dead." Her eyes didn't leave the helmet. "You listened. That's what saved you." He shook his head. "No, you did, and I was wrong about you." For the first time she looked at him fully. He wasn't the arrogant boy she'd sparred with in the hangar. Not anymore. He was younger still, under the anger, just a soldier desperate not to be another name carved into a wall. "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "I did leave. I did run, and it cost lives. Her throat tightened. But now I'm here, and if I'm here it means I don't get to run again. Carter swallowed hard, eyes glistening. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was its own apology. The next morning, she was summoned back to the Capitol. The council chamber was colder this time. The silver-haired chairwoman stood at the center, her expression unreadable. Around her, the others murmured in tones that carried both awe and suspicion. She turned the tide single-handedly. Luck, nothing more. Luck doesn't fly formations into victory. Or maybe she's dangerous. The chairwoman silenced them with a glance before turning to her. You fought well, but know this, the enemy has seen you now. They will not underestimate you again, and neither will we. The weight of those words sank like lead. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. When she returned to the base, the mood was different. Respect lingered in the eyes of the pilots, yes, but so did expectation. They looked to her not just for skill, but for strength, for answers. One evening, they gathered around a fire pit just beyond the barracks, the desert wind carrying sparks into the night. Laughter echoed, brittle but real. Someone passed her a cup, and though she rarely drank, she accepted. The conversation drifted, from near misses to old regrets. A mechanic spoke of the wife he hadn't seen in 3 years. Another pilot confessed he still wrote letters to a brother long dead, as though one day he might answer. When it came to her, silence fell. All eyes turned, waiting. She hesitated, then slowly she spoke. I had a wingman, she said quietly. His name was Daniel. He was better than me, smarter, braver. We flew together until the day the sky swallowed him whole. I watched him burn. I lived, and I couldn't forgive that. The fire crackled, the desert wind carrying her words away. No one spoke, but their silence was not judgment. It was understanding, shared weight. For the first time in 12 years, she felt less alone. Days turned into a rhythm. Training, drills, debriefs. Nights under stars that felt colder than before. The fortress she carried inside her chest held, but cracks still whispered beneath the steel. Then came the order. The colonel delivered it in person, his expression carved from stone. You're being reassigned, not away from us, but above us. Command wants you to lead the first strike against their stronghold. The prototypes were only the beginning. Intelligence says they're building something worse. Her jaw tightened, and the squadron. They'll follow you. The words hit harder than the order itself. She had become their anchor. Their lives were now bound to her decisions. That night she couldn't sleep. She stood outside the hangar, the desert stretching endless and dark, stars cold against the horizon. Her chest ached with the weight of it, the responsibility, the ghosts, the endless cycle of war. She closed her eyes, hearing again Daniel's last scream, feeling again the heat of his fire. But then faintly she remembered Carter's words, "You saved me." And beneath the ghosts something fragile stirred. Not pride, not absolution, just purpose. A reason to carry the fire one more day. The squadron gathered at dawn. Engines roared, steel birds trembling on the tarmac. Faces tight with fear, but eyes locked on her. She climbed into her cockpit, the cracked visor replaced, but the memory of it still etched deep. Her lungs burned, not with weakness, but with steel. Over the comms, she spoke only once before launch. We don't fly to live. We fly so others can, remember that, and if the sky breaks us, then we rebuild, stronger. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was belief. The engine screamed, the sky opened, and the fortress rose again. Why was the silence heavier than the war itself? She stood on the tarmac, helmet tucked under her arm, the wind from the departing aircraft brushing against her face like the ghost of every pilot who had once flown beside her. The night sky above was clear now. No more searchlights, no tracer rounds, just stars, cold, distant, untouchable. And yet she felt none of it was over. The mission had ended hours ago. The fortress she carried within her veins and lungs had held. She had done what few believed possible, and yet the victory tasted of ash, because the names of the fallen still echoed in her head. She walked slowly toward the hangar lights, every step dragging more weight than her body should have carried. A voice called out, a mechanic, someone young, offering to take her gear. She only shook her head. There was something she wasn't ready to let go of. Not the flight suit, not the scars beneath it. Inside, the others waited, the surviving squad, faces half-shadowed, half-exhausted, all broken in their own ways. No one cheered. No one spoke loud. The room felt like a church without prayers, only the sound of boots scuffing against the concrete. She placed her helmet down on the table. The hollow thud rang longer than it should have. And then she sat. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed, until someone finally whispered, "We made it." But did they? Her hands trembled against the metal surface. She closed her eyes, remembering the cold silence of the radio when one voice after another went dark. The way the fire bloomed across the night. The way the fortress inside her had threatened to crumble, and how she had forced it to stand. They called it strength, she called it survival. The commander entered. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on her longer than on anyone else. He said only 4 words. "You did your duty." Duty. That word sharp as glass. The one she had lived by, bled by, lost by. She almost laughed, almost cried. Instead, she only nodded. Later, when the others drifted off, some to cots, some to cigarettes under the stars, she remained alone. The hangar quieted. The machines ticked as they cooled. The ghosts came closer. And she asked herself the question that had haunted her since the first day she put on the uniform. Was duty enough? Her mind reached backward, to the little girl who had once watched planes carve the sky, dreaming of flight but never of war. To the woman who carried fire in her veins, steel in her lungs, and the ache of every farewell pressed into her bones. To the friend she had lost years ago, who had whispered on their last mission, "Promise me you'll come back." She had come back, but did that promise mean anything when so many others had? The night stretched on, the silence pressed deeper, until finally she rose and walked out into the open air. The runway stretched into darkness. She stopped halfway, staring at the horizon. The stars were sharp above her, fierce in their coldness, and in that vast silence she felt something stir inside her chest. Not triumph, not despair, something quieter, something unbreakable. She remembered their faces, the fallen, the survivors, even those who doubted her. She carried them all, not as weight but as a fortress. For the fortress was never walls, never weapons, never the steel of machines. It was her. The way she stood when others broke, the way she carried their names when no one else would, the way she bled quietly so another could breathe loudly. She was the fortress unbroken. Not because she hadn't cracked, not because she hadn't wept, but because she had endured. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, soft and pale. She breathed it in. The air felt different now, lighter, though nothing had truly changed. And yet maybe that was enough. When the others found her there, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was something else, something closer to reverence. One by one they stood with her, facing the dawn, carrying their own fire, their own steel in whatever way they could. And she realized fortresses didn't stand alone. They never had. Her journey wasn't about walls that could never fall. It was about being human in a world that demanded more than humanity, about choosing to stay standing not for herself, but for those who couldn't. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. Her eyes told the truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in the quiet of that morning, with the ghosts still lingering and the future still uncertain, she knew one thing for certain. Her fire would burn until it couldn't. Her steel would hold until it broke. And when both were gone, the fortress would remain, carried forward in those who had seen her stand. That was her legacy. Not medals, not speeches, not history books. Just the silence after battle. The breath before dawn. The weight of standing unbroken when everything else had fallen. And as the sun rose higher, casting light across the weary faces around her, she whispered, not for them, not for anyone else, but for herself, "I am still here." The words vanished into the morning air. But the truth lingered. Because sometimes survival itself is the loudest victory. And sometimes the last fortress is not made of stone or steel. It is made of a woman who refused to fall.